There is a passage hidden deep within the Gospel of Philip, a passage that, according to several scholars of ancient Christian texts, may have been intentionally removed from most surviving manuscripts. It speaks not of rituals or moral rules, but of three physical objects Jesus reportedly told his closest initiates to carry at all times, not as decorations, not as symbolic reminders, but as protective tools believed to operate at a frequency hostile spiritual forces could not penetrate. According to some Gnostic interpretations, this passage described three things made by hands, carrying the light of the pleroma. It claimed that when the powers, what the texts call archons, saw these objects, they recoiled in fear because they recognized the vibration of something that did not originate on earth. In the early centuries, Gnostic communities took this teaching seriously. They worked in secrecy. They crafted these objects by hand. They passed them from teacher to student. They hid them in plain sight. And countless accounts claim that those who carried these items noticed profound changes, mental pressure fading, intrusive thoughts quieting, spiritual heaviness lifting almost instantly. Whether these stories were literal or symbolic is still debated, but the communities who preserved these teachings believed these were not ornaments. They were frequency anchors, items that held a pattern of divine consciousness and broadcasted it continuously, making the carrier invisible to anything operating below that range. This idea was considered so destabilizing to church authority that medieval scribes attempted to erase much of it from existence. Because if ordinary believers could craft simple items offering spiritual protection, what would become of institutional gatekeeping? If protection became personal, direct, and tangible, what would priestly mediation be needed for? According to the Gnostics, this is exactly why these teachings were suppressed. Tonight, we explore the three objects these early communities revered, why archons allegedly fear them more than any spoken prayer, and how each one was believed to shield the mind, the body, and the environment of anyone carrying them. If you're exploring ancient spiritual protections, keep listening. What comes next is a part of the story that was never meant to survive. 1. The first object, lapis lazuli, the stone of perception. Across Egypt, Sumer, Persia, and early Gnostic circles, one stone appears again and again with nearly identical significance, lapis lazuli. Every ancient mystery school referred to it as a stone of heaven, a vessel of divine fire, or window between worlds. Gnostic interpreters connected this blue stone to the opening of spiritual perception. In texts like the Secret Book of John, the divine spark breathed into humanity by Sophia is described metaphorically as descending like sapphire fire. Later mystics believed this wasn't poetic imagery. It was a clue that certain minerals naturally carry resonances aligned with the higher consciousness humans were originally meant to access. The Gnostics viewed lapis lazuli as one of these minerals. They believed it held a frequency similar to the awakened pineal gland in the crown center, which archons supposedly attempt to suppress. The teaching was simple. If you can't perceive the spiritual realm, you remain trapped in a limited sense-based reality, unable to see manipulation or interference. According to these traditions, archons attack the third eye center energetically, while environmental toxins calcify it physically. The combination keeps the average person anchored to strictly material perception. But when someone carried lapis lazuli, especially against the skin, something changed. Modern science confirms that many minerals emit measurable electromagnetic frequencies. The Gnostics believed lapis emitted the same frequency the pineal gland resonates at when unblocked and operating clearly. So when a chosen individual carried the stone, the vibration acted almost like a tuning fork, reminding the inner senses of a natural state. People throughout these traditions reported similar experiences. Heightened intuition, a strong synchronicities, a vivid, coherent dreaming, a sudden clarity of previously invisible patterns, the ability to sense spiritual presence as a felt reality, not imagination. According to Gnostic writings, Archons feared this not because the stone harmed them, but because it restored sight. Once a person could see manipulation, it no longer functioned. Their power depended on stealth. Lapis lazuli removed the veil. After weeks of carrying it, many mystics claimed the perception stayed open even when the stone was removed. It was not a charm, it was a catalyst. So in the ancient Gnostic system, if someone felt spiritually blind or cut off from intuition, this was the first object given to them, not as superstition, but as a tool to restore what they believed archonic interference tried to suppress. But restoring vision wasn't the only defense. There was a second object, something far simpler and much more feared, a written name. 2. The second object, the written name I am Monad. In the Gospel of Philip, there's a cryptic line, a name is a great thing. Some names deceive, but the hidden name makes the powers tremble. Many mainstream teachers interpreted this as referring to the name of Jesus, but Gnostic groups believed Jesus was pointing towards something older, more universal, a mystical name representing the source itself, the monad. The idea was not that the name must be spoken, but that it must be written by the practitioner's own hand. Writing it was considered an act of anchoring identity into physical reality. Gnostic teachers believed spoken word vanished as soon as it was spoken, but written word created lasting energetic structures, what some later mystics called standing waves of intention. The phrase they preserved was, I am Monad. They believed this was not a sentence but a declaration of identity, the individual spark recognizing its unity with the infinite. According to Gnostic tradition, when someone writes these words in their own handwriting, slowly, intentionally, with awareness, they create a physical object said to broadcast a stabilizing frequency. The steps described in their writings were precise. Use clean, unused paper, use ink, not pencil. Write the phrase exactly, then fold the paper 3 times, carry it on the body. Not as magic, as identity. Those who practiced this claimed the effects were immediate. Mental fog dissolving or intrusive thoughts quieting or emotional manipulation from others losing its grip, confusion replaced by clarity. The belief was that archons influenced consciousness primarily through doubt, contradiction, and fragmentation of thought. But the written name recentered the mind around an unwavering identity. It was a statement, I know what I am. And in spiritual cosmology, identity is authority. This object was considered so powerful that some medieval church authorities reportedly erased references to it, fearing it would undermine their role as intermediaries. The Gnostics believed that written identity could not be overridden. It created a protective field not through ritual, but through recognition. Yet even this wasn't the final object. The third one wasn't carried, it was placed. And according to these traditions, it was the one that could change the atmosphere of an entire room. 3. The third object, the drawn monad circle. Unlike the other two, the third object required no stone and no words, only a simple geometric drawing, a circle with a single point at the center. This symbol appears in multiple early mystical traditions as a diagram of creation itself. The circle is infinite consciousness of the point as the individualized spark of unity expressed in form. To the Gnostics, drawing this symbol was a way to visualize and anchor the relationship between the human self and the source. And because archons were said to operate through illusions of separation, this symbol represented the one truth they could not withstand. It wasn't considered artwork. It was considered technology, geometry as a vessel for divine recognition. When the symbol was drawn intentionally, Gnostic teachers believed it generated a stabilizing field in whatever space it occupied. The effect was described consistently across multiple texts. Rooms felt lighter, sleep became peaceful, dreams became coherent, or oppressive sensations stopped or environmental heaviness lifted. The explanation was simple. Frequencies based on unity displace frequencies based on separation. You don't fight darkness. You introduce light, and the darkness dissipates naturally because it cannot coexist in the same pattern. This symbol wasn't meant to protect a person. It was meant to protect a location, a home, a sanctuary, a room, a gathering space. Some Gnostic groups carved it into stone. Others painted it across doorframes or placed it above their beds. Early Christian authorities attempted to destroy these symbols when they encountered them, believing they were signs of heretical communities. But the symbol kept returning, and the teaching survived underground, passed from mystic to mystic as quiet knowledge. According to these ancient interpretations, the stone restores sight, the written name restores identity, the symbol restores environment. Together, they formed a triad of protection. 4. Why these teachings were suppressed. There is a theory among some scholars of early mystical Christianity. If protection becomes personal, institutions lose control. If believers carry their own tools for shielding, exorcisms lose their monopoly. Priestly mediation becomes unnecessary as spiritual authority returns to the individual. The early church depended on centralized spiritual power, so any teaching suggesting believers could protect themselves directly without ritual, clergy, or permission was viewed as dangerous. According to these interpretations, the three objects undermined institutional hierarchy because they implied that protection was not granted from outside, but awakened from within. So these teachings faded, not because they lacked meaning, but because they gave too much power to ordinary people. 5. Which object aligns with your experience? Based on the original Gnostic system, if you feel spiritually blind or cut off from intuition, the stone. If you feel mentally foggy or manipulated, the written name. If your home feels heavy or disturbed, the drawn symbol. Each addresses a different form of interference described in the texts. Each works on a different level: perception, identity, environment. The power wasn't in the object. It was in the recognition the object represented. 6. What happens once these objects are activated? In Gnostic cosmology, archons operate through confusion, distortion, invisibility, and fragmentation of thought. But once perception sharpens, identity stabilizes, and environment harmonizes, their influence diminishes. People who work with these practices historically reported sudden clarity or relief from mental pressure, emotional detachment from draining interactions, or a sense of internal sovereignty or a felt sense of being beyond reach. Not because forces were banished, but because the individual no longer vibrated at the level where interference occurred. Protection wasn't warfare. Protection was elevation. Conclusion: returning to sovereignty. These three objects, lapis lazuli, the written declaration, and the monad circle, weren't presented as magic. They were, in the eyes of ancient spiritual communities, technologies of remembrance, tools to remind you of what you are, not what the world conditioned you to forget. Whether one views them as literal tools, symbolic practices, or metaphors of inner awakening, their purpose remains the same: to return the mind to clarity, the self to identity, and the space around you to harmony. The Gnostics believed that the greatest protection was not fear, ritual, or dependence on outside authority. The greatest protection was a recognition of one's unity with the source, the monad. Everything else, in their view, was a temporary illusion. And anything aligned with illusion has no power over one who remembers their origin. You were never meant to bow to fear. You were meant to awaken to sovereignty. And the moment recognition returns, the interference loses its hold. You rise above its range. You become unreachable. You become free. Subscribe to the Bloom because advanced techniques using these three sacred objects are coming.